Yes, indeed, y'all. Dr. Sebastian Rushworth is a Swedish doctor, written extensively about COVID. Very, very, very important book. And it is available at DennisPrager.com or at SebastianRushworth.com. And it is published this year in Stockholm. COVID, Why Most of What You Know is Wrong. And it is vindicating of everything that you have heard on this program for the last year and a half. We're talking about the Swedish response and why you feel that was right and the rest of the world was wrong. So continue.
So I think Sweden really just followed what the WHO had agreed was the correct way to handle the pandemic before COVID hit. And I think what happened, personally, I think it has a lot to do with random chance. I think it has to do with the fact that the pandemic started in China, and this is just my personal speculation and my trying to make sense of what happened, but the Chinese authorities made this big show of doing harsh lockdowns. They were welding doors shut, welding people into apartment buildings, and you saw trucks driving around spraying disinfectant over everything, and they kind of put on this whole show that made this seem like a very severe pandemic. And then a month or so later, they said, "Look, COVID's gone. There isn't a single case here in Wuhan anymore. We've gotten rid of it." And I think the rest of the world saw this and panicked, and saw that China was claiming that they were doing amazing things, and demanded that, and people in the West demanded that their political leaders do the same thing, and then when politicians and governments started doing these things, they got scared and they thought, wow, they're locking down, this must be really bad, and they started demanding even harsher lockdowns, and I think we kind of ended up in this positive feedback loop where the populace was demanding harsher and harsher measures, and the politicians were giving harsher and harsher measures. And I mean, Sweden isn't immune. The Swedish media have been demanding harsh lockdowns since the beginning. I think the main difference with Sweden is that I think it's partly that the decisions were being made by, the big decisions were being made by career epidemiologists. The politicians weren't really involved, at least during the first wave, in the decisions. The decisions were being made by epidemiologists. And I think in Sweden there's also a tradition of respect for the Constitution, and so while governments in a lot of other countries were running roughshod over their constitutions, the Swedish government went, well, we have to respect our constitution, so we can't do these things because they're unconstitutional.
God, I hope everybody heard every word you said. You have no idea how often I praised Sweden in the last year and a half. I'll get back to that. I just want to understand something that I'm not clear about. What the Chinese did with the lockdown, the severe lockdown, which gave the world an example of what to follow, was that a show, or were they doing it because they believed it would work?
So, well, I mean, it's pure speculation on my part. I can't know what they were thinking, but it was clear early on that this pandemic was, I mean, it's a bad flu, but it's not worse than that. And so from my perspective, what they were doing was more putting on a show than I mean, seriously trying to stop the pandemic, because I think they knew how they knew what they were dealing with from the beginning.
So you think they were putting on the show so that the rest of the world would emulate them, would copy them?
I don't think the goal was necessarily for the rest of the world to emulate it. I think it might just have been intended for the internal Chinese audience to see how strong and powerful the Chinese government is, and how, because remember, the Chinese were kind of the Chinese government was their initial response was to pretend like COVID didn't exist, and then I think it kind of went viral on social media in China, and they felt, okay, we need to have a different approach because this isn't something we can just knock down, and then they went with this alternate strategy of putting on this big Hollywood movie style show, and so I think it was intended as a. My guess would be that it was primarily intended as a show of strength for the Chinese populace, but then the rest of the world saw what they were doing and freaked out. That's just my guess, though. I mean, that could be completely wrong.
It makes a lot of sense what you're saying. All right, I want to get back to Sweden. I followed Sweden intensely. I don't read Swedish, but much can be translated, and much is in English. I knew that the Swedish media were angry beyond words. Plus, many Swedish doctors were condemning the decisions of your leading epidemiologist. So, which comes first, the chicken or the egg? The politician or the panic-stricken epidemiologist? That's my next question for Dr. Sebastian Rushworth, a Swedish truth-telling doctor whose work I have been reading all year. His book is up at DennisPrager.com.